Todd, your family.
That's correct.
My understanding, Gee Creek was named after the Gee family.
It is. In fact, I took my daughter up there to go on a little hiking trail just yesterday. It's a lovely piece of this area.
Where exactly is Gee Creek?
Well, you have to go over into Polk County, and you go up, I believe it's 411, and you go up there, and frankly, I'm very bad at giving directions. But
There's a campsite, right?
yes, yeah, part of it is, yeah. And it's a good-sized creek, it's especially full at this time of year.
Is it like real wide?
It's probably, I'd guess, between 15 and 30 feet in places.
Do you think the Gees were named after Gee Creek, or Gee Creek was named after the Gees?
I think it's the latter. We've traced our family back to at least the 1650s. We came over from Manchester, England.
You know why?
No, I don't. I imagine that he thought that he could make a good living, a better life for himself in the U.S., what would become the U.S.
Do you think they came through the Alleghenies, they call it, through the Appalachian?
My review of the history suggests that we came into Virginia first and then gradually made our way down to East Tennessee.
And stopped. So we think that Gee Creek was probably named after the Gees.
I think so.
Now, J.W. is your grandfather,
He is.
and J.W. married Jackie Gee, who's done my bookkeeping for years, since I was probably 16. And let's see, now her mother was?
Her mother was May Ruth Pierce.
Ruth Pierce, yeah, I knew her well. I always get them and Edith messed up. Where does Edith come into play?
Edith is Ruth's younger sister.
So Edith's your aunt,
Yes,
and she was a teacher at Stewart School.
I believe so, yeah.
And so Jackie, now, where does, I know this is, I probably should know this, but where does the samples come in?
Okay, so Samples, Creed Samples was Ruth and Edith's father, and he was both a general storekeeper and a preacher in the Churches of Christ.
Creed Samples. What era?
What era? Would have been the first half of the 20th century.
Creed Samples. Now, where does the Randolphs come in?
Okay, now we're getting complicated.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the Randolphs are cousins of ours, and you should probably talk to Kim.
Kim
Randolph.
he would know.
Yes, but we are fairly closely related.
Because between 64 Highway and Bates Pike is Randolph Samples Road. So I knew that there was a connection related. So now, wonder, how did Jackie Gee meet J.W.?
I'm not for certain. I would guess it was at school, though.
In Polk County? Or was she from, no, she wasn't from Polk County.
I think it would have been here in Bradley County.
They might have been Trevina School. Wasn't there? There's a Trevina School between Randolph Samples Road and Benton. So maybe
that predates me, so maybe so.
Maybe that's so. So now Jimmy, he's younger than me, your dad.
Yeah.
But not a lot. And he was raised on Hancock Road.
Yep.
And you lived on Hancock Road. You were born there?
I was not born there. I was born in Gadsden, Alabama, but I've spent a great deal of time there. In fact, that's where I live now.
How did Jimmy get to Gadsden?
What he did was during his time in the Air Force, he met my mother, who was at the time a student at Alabama Christian in Montgomery, Alabama. After they got married, they lived in the Oxford, Alabama area where my mother's side's from.
So why did they move back to Cleveland?
Well, in fact, they've moved all over. At times, Cleveland's been a temporary place for us to stay before going overseas, or generally that was it. We were in Cleveland because our family was there, and we were staying there for a few months until we moved someplace else.
So you were living in Bradley County till you were. What you remember first living in Gadsden or first living in Bradley County?
That is a good question. I would say I have some significant memories of living in the Gadsden, Oxford, Alabama area. I think I'd remember that first, but I do have some memories of staying in the basement apartment on Hancock Road as well.
I've been in that basement. We went over there for dinner for something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I ride bicycles by the house.
Okay.
So you went to Africa?
Yes, sir.
At what age?
Originally at about age 9, we went over there for a year. We were supposed to be there for 3 years, but my mother became pregnant with my twin brother and sister, so we cut that stay over, and we came back to Cleveland for close to a year, several months anyway, so that he could be born, so that those twin siblings could be born, and we could get them where they should be. Now, my twin sister only lived about 6 days, but Stuart, he's grown up into a young man who's taller than me.
Mm.
Yeah.
How old is he now?
He is 10 years my junior, so he'll be 20. No, sorry, he'll be 19 next month.
So that makes you 29.
Yes.
And he's already taller?
He is.
You call him little brother?
It's funny because he was Stuart Little when he was born. He was 12 weeks early.
That was about the time the movie came out, wasn't it, Stuart Little?
Not long after.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
So then you moved to Africa.
We came back from Africa in 2001. We went back in 2005. Between coming back and going over, we were mostly in Louisiana, but we went back in 2005, and my parents stayed there even longer than I did, but I stayed there until 2009.
And then came back to school.
Yeah.
Was living in Africa about like living here? Is there McDonald's?
No, there was a knockoff that they called McMoody's though. They had a chicken nugget, not chicken nugget, but a chicken nugget on the menu. It was half a fried chicken.
Mm. So was it if you were there? I know if you go to some towns they have all the same stuff, you know, but not there.
No.
You knew you were there.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much got its own distinctive flavor.
Did you go to school there?
I was homeschooled my entire life, so I was learning over there, but I never went any place of formal education.
Did your mother teach you homeschool? Or?
She did, though about age 14, my parents basically said, Todd, you're old enough to direct your own education. Tell us what books to buy, and we'll buy them, and that's what we did.
Now, I don't want to embarrass you, but the rumor is that you're highly intelligent.
That's a rumor. It's never been formally tested by any IQ test. I'm not a member of Mensa.
But I've been told that by people who know. So
I'm sure you have been.
There must be something there.
I'd like to think so.
Do you think that came from your self-education?
It's probably mostly genetic, but it certainly helps. I was a self-starter when it came to my education.
Jackie's smart.
She is. She is. Smart enough to work with all those numbers.
Yep, she gets it. On taxes, she gets it. You know, she doesn't get confused. She understands it. She knows what's important and what's not important.
That's very important.
Yeah. So when you came back here, did you decide that you were going to be a lawyer? Did you come back here and say, okay, which college do I want to go to? Did they have colleges there?
They do, but I'm not sure how easy it would be to carry those credits over to, say, a law school in the U.S. But I originally, go ahead.
Were you aware of that? That if you want to get an education, that it needs to be accredited schools in America versus there?
I think I knew that, yeah. I was somewhat aware of those issues because my father was teaching at and then directing a school of preaching over there, and he had to be concerned about accreditation issues. They were accredited through a Bible school here in the U.S., so I was generally aware of that issue.
So you thought, I better go to school in America.
Yes, and I think by that time I was ready to come back to America.
That was a movie, wasn't it? No, it was Coming to America.
Yeah. And I think that was about a young man from Africa coming to
That's
America.
right, yeah. You were just the opposite. So were you wanting to be a lawyer when you came from there?
I think that was my general plan, yes. When, as a teenager, I'd wanted to go into, say, Air Force Special Operations, but after I met a young officer who was in that line of work, and we went to his air base in Georgia and we toured it. I figured out that it would be many years before I could have a family if I wanted to do that job properly, and so I decided that having been told that I was well suited to be an attorney, I decided to pursue the law.
Who said you were well suited for that?
Mostly my parents. I had this very annoying tendency of using logic to win arguments.
Mm-hmm. And logic is logic arbitrary, or is logic science?
I think logic is objective. I think that there's, if you're using bad logic, you're not using logic at all. So I would say it is a science.
So logic using correct logic is using science.
Yes, gets at the very nature of truth.
Mm-hmm. That's logic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always remember Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
What was it Spock used to say? That's illogical.
Probably so. I was never a Star Trek the original series guy.
Yeah.
I was more of the Next Generation. That's what I grew up watching, Captain Picard.
Yeah. Well, I watched all the Star Treks,
Uh-huh.
and Spock would always say he didn't use any emotion to. It was all either logical or illogical, and he didn't let any. Of course, his mother was normal, but his dad was a Vulcan, so
Right.
he did have. So he was always fighting that.
Very conflicted.
Conflicted, yeah. But did you use logic with them with arguing?
Yes. I could be quite infuriating to my younger siblings.
So where'd you go to law school?
So I went to law school at the Jones School of Law, which was, and as far as I know, is still owned by Faulkner University. So I really did not have to travel for my law degree. I just walked across campus when I finished my undergrad there at Faulkner.
What's the undergrad? 4 years? And
4
then you
years,
go
yeah.
2 more years?
3 more years in law school.
Do you have to practice law under somebody?
No, you don't have to. That really is the more traditional way of doing it, but most states have left that way of doing things, and now you just go to law school, get a degree, and try to pass the bar.
And then you're on your own?
Pretty much, unless you can find someone who wants to hire you and mentor you. But I took the hard way. Once I passed the bar,
put out a shingle?
Exactly, and built my own practice. I can't take all the credit for it. I had a lot of good local attorneys who did help me out and referred me cases, but I never had the opportunity to associate myself with a firm.
So you don't know if you're doing it right or wrong.
I think you have to look at my results to determine whether I'm doing it right, but I think that generally I am.
Which law do you try to practice?
The majority of my practice is criminal defense here in both Bradley County as well as the rest of the 10th Judicial District, which is McMinn, Monroe, and Polk. Sometimes make it over to Hamilton County, made it as far north as Morgan County, mostly here in the 10th.
So criminals that have done something bad come to you and say, hey, I need you to hire a lawyer.
People who have been accused of doing something
Right,
bad.
Yeah.
They're presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Is that still the way it is?
That's still the way it is. I fear that sometimes the public doesn't realize that. I think there are a lot of jumps to judgment. You know, if someone's been arrested, oh, they must be guilty. But that's simply not the case.
You know, that is the big thing right now, or not just in law, but even reading the newspaper. You read the headlines in the first 2 sentences and you think you've read it, but you really haven't read it.
No.
You go down through there and you say, that's not what happened at all.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we tend to do that. I'm aware of it, but maybe I'm not as aware as I think I am.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm what do you call it? What do they call that when you think you know, but you haven't done the research?
There's a lot of words you could use to describe that. Pretentious would be one,
Yeah.
but and just prejudging.
Yeah, pretentious or prejudging, or so it makes you wonder how much, like on I guess it'd be like a car mechanic. You bring your car in and they fix your tire, and they say, ever since you fixed my tire, my car doesn't run right.
Mm-hmm.
So they're assuming that that'd be pretentious too, right?
Yeah, it would be.
So, do you think when if you're living in Africa and you're watching TV at night,
Sure.
is it the same TV shows?
Absolutely not. They get a lot of programming that's either local or perhaps comes from Europe. The BBC's popular down there, as well as some
They
other
speak
European
English?
channels. The part of Africa where I was, in Tanzania, the primary language was Kiswahili, though a significant percentage of the population speaks English. Their neighbor to the north, Kenya, Kenya and Tanzania both got their independence about the same time from the British, and the Tanzanians took a more nationalistic approach, said, we're going to speak Kiswahili. The Kenyans said, well, we know we have access to the British. They speak English. We're going to speak English, join perhaps the broader international community, and you do see that difference.
Now, how would they say, okay, we're going to speak this language if you didn't know that language? I'd say it's an evolution type thing, right?
Certainly, though I think that, in Kenya, I believe they adopted a government policy where we want to teach English in the schools. And so most Kenyans speak decent English. Tanzanians, while they do teach English as a language in many schools, Kiswahili is still the first, to the best of my knowledge.
Is that it? Do you know? Can you speak that, or which?
Kidogo sana, very little. I haven't had an opportunity to practice.
So
it
when
for
you
several
lived there,
years.
did you speak the foreign language?
Not completely.
Because
no.
they were mostly spoke English there.
They mostly did not speak English, but I did not have as much of a need to speak it fluently as perhaps some others, because I was still only a child, and we had very good friends there who were good translators.
Mm-hmm. Did you go? They have grocery stores there?
They do, thankfully. You have to search them out and try to find them. It took us probably weeks or months to find a decent butcher shop where the meat wasn't just hanging out in the open with flies covering it. But over the years we were there, things became a little more modern, and we ate well enough. But I will admit that I was skinnier then than I am now.
Mm-hmm. Where do you live in Cleveland?
The family farm we were discussing,
Yeah.
Hancock Road. We live on that farm.
Oh.
My grandparents have a house out back behind the main house that me and my family live in.
Mm. So, what do you think about? I was going to ask you something else. You do some rental evictions.
Yes, I do. I do some landlord work as well as creditor work doing collections. Besides the criminal defense, that is my other major area of focus.
Now, you work out of Doug's, I call it Doug's office, but...
Yeah, 63 north of Coe Street.
You're in the front now.
I have an assistant who sits out in the front, but I'm the second door on the left as you go down the hall.
That's where you were. That's where you've always been,
Yes,
right?
yeah. My landlord there's been very good to me.
Which is who?
It's Doug K. Wood and Robert Thompson of Logan Thompson.
So Doug and Robert own it.
Yes.
Yeah. So you moved into what I'd call the boardroom, or your assistant did?
My assistant's in the front reception area, and I do a lot of work in that conference room out front that I think you're referring to.
Yeah.
Because most of my other office mates don't use it very often, so I'll often kind of set up in there because I do have a lot of files and paperwork that get spread out.
It seems like you would outgrow that pretty quick.
It's definitely possible, but again, my landlords treat me well, so I'm going to stay there as long as they'll have me.
Yeah, just stay as long as. But everybody's doing so much now electronically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have it all pretty much set up? My guess is that you're state of the art when it comes to electronics and emails.
Yeah, I prefer to do as much by email as possible. I hate taking a phone call. I'd much rather send an email or send a text message. But it's a working process. Every once in a while I'll say I need to scan everything up into a computer and go totally electronic. But at the end of the day, it's good to have a piece of paper in your hand too.
Something about having it on a computer and reading it just doesn't feel. I don't know if that's our generation or your generation, or if there's something magical about holding it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. People have Kindles and ebooks and all kinds of stuff, and I have a few. But when it comes to anything, whether it's work related or personal reading, I would much rather have a book in my hand, especially because I like to take notes, underline, highlight. You can do those things on a e-reader or a PDF, but it's just not the same.
It's not the same. I was talking to Larry Presswood here a while back, and he says he likes to hold the next page. And he says you can't do that when you're reading from a Kindle or whatever.
That's right. That's right.
So what do you do in your spare time, would you say?
Sure. So I do a few different things. I raise quail, Japanese quail.
Now, how would you raise a quail?
Well, thankfully they're not very time or labor intensive. They're smaller than a chicken, of course, and we actually have an incubator. We can take fertile eggs from our own flock or another flock and put them in there for about 16 days, and you hatch them out, and then you put them in a little brooder, just like you would a chicken, and you raise them up, and once they get feathered and it's warm enough outside, you can put them outside. We're running heat lamps right now because it's so cold, and about 8 to 10 weeks, they're fully grown, and you could either process them for meat, or you could sell them or keep them for the eggs. And so right now, we're mostly an egg-laying operation.
Why quail?
Once again, they're a little smaller than chickens, so easier to handle, easier to get started, because your quail honestly don't cost as much as chickens, and plus they're...
Well, you said raising.
Yeah.
I thought you said racing.
Oh!
I was trying to figure out how you'd race them.
That's my bad. I haven't yet gotten into the quail racing business. If someone can show me where the money is in that, then I'll look into it.
But why would you say, let's go into the quail raising?
It's a little different. Everybody has chickens. Not as many people have quail. And,
But why even an animal?
you got to diversify your income streams.
Were you thinking of a hobby, or?
I'll tell you, the first reason I had to get started in it was this was a couple of months into the pandemic. The law practice had slowed down because the courts had essentially been shut down. You got to remember that when people who have been accused of crimes have been told they don't have to go to court for several months, they're less motivated to hire an attorney.
Yeah.
And so I was also concerned about, say, the logistics of the food supply chain, because we saw we couldn't even keep toilet paper in stock. So I said to my wife, well, we need to become a little more self-sufficient. We should raise some protein on the farm. And so we decided to go with quail, and so far we haven't had to eat many eggs.
Did you research it and just determine
quail?
quail? Were you open to anything at that time?
I had my eye on quail for several months, but I didn't really pull the trigger on it until we were a few months into COVID.
Is a quail people quail hunt?
They do.
Was a quail like as big as this cup?
Yeah, I'd say mine are probably about that big around, some of them.
I never figured there'd be much to eat on that.
It certainly isn't as much as a chicken, but most people I've spoken to who have had them say that they're very tasty. And
what would you eat quail with?
You could cook it pretty much like you'd cook any other poultry dish, like a chicken. You could wrap it in bacon. You could cook it in butter. You could fry it, though I don't know that a drumstick would be worth much.
Yeah. Yeah, or they have a wishbone in them?
I imagine they do. Frankly, I haven't processed one yet because I've been able to sell all of my eggs and little chicks and adult birds.
Who buys them?
I'll tell you, something I've noticed is I've had a lot of Spanish-speaking customers who were very interested, especially in the eggs. And we think it may be people from, specifically from the Philippines, because my wife went to some of the Hispanic groceries around here, and she would talk to them about quail and quail eggs, and they wouldn't know what she was talking about. But it seems like people from that part of the world, East Asia also, we have a good Vietnamese client who likes to buy them from us, and so.
Now when you go through Benton, there's a place there that sells eggs. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about, behind the courthouse? Behind
the courthouse. I normally don't stop there, but
there's a place that says, and if you stop, you can go in. You get them out of the refrigerator on this porch, and you put $3 in the tray, and you get a dozen eggs.
Yeah.
So when they get them from you, do they put them in a box?
Yeah, we've got these little, I'm trying to remember what they're called. I think my wife says they're called gable boxes. But they're little boxes about this tall with a handle on it. They're all cardboard, and put about between a dozen and a half in one, because those quail eggs are only about that big.
Would you crack them like eating eggs?
They're a little harder to crack than the chicken eggs. So if you're going to eat a lot of them, process a lot of them, there are actually quail egg scissors that you can get that you can cut off the top with, and it makes it a little easier.
But what would you do? Scramble them?
You could scramble them. I've scrambled them. You can boil them. We've been told by one of our clients who cooks a lot of them, this Vietnamese lady, that it's really when you boil them that the different flavor, as opposed to that of a chicken, comes out. Scrambled, they taste really like chicken eggs.
So it would be sort of a delicacy around here.
Yeah, I think so, and the profit margins reflect that. You can sell a dozen quail eggs for as much as a dozen chicken eggs, though they're 25% the size.
Do you have a house for them?
Yeah, we've got a couple of pens for them. We got one out under our carport and another further out in the yard, and it's got a tin roof. And
what about coyotes?
We haven't seen any coyotes, but fencing and making sure that the holes in the sides are very small. That's very important, because we have lost some to what we think are raccoons. But you just got to get really fencing with really small holes in it.
Is there anybody that produces these on large scale?
There are. I don't know them by name or exactly where they are, but there are people who produce large amounts. There's actually an incubator you can buy. It's trying to recall. It's like a cabinet style incubator. You can hatch over 1,300 at a time. So there's someone out there who's producing a lot.
Did you study up on this when you determined quail eggs?
I did. I looked at it for several months before I pulled the trigger on it.
What did you do first? Buy 2 quail?
No, my wife, who's much more hands-on with things like woodworking and so forth, she built us a double-stack pen, and then we went and bought, I want to say, 40 quail chicks from a fellow in this area, and we raised them up to adult size, put them in the pens.
And then sell the eggs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you advertise to sell the eggs?
Yes, primarily on Craigslist, as well as there are several livestock and poultry Facebook groups that we're members of for this area, and we've been able to sell most everything we needed to.
Boy, that's interesting.
It's very interesting.
Sort of like a hobby that you can make some money at, maybe.
Yeah. It's been surprisingly successful. I also have goats, but sell a few of those a year.
Goats? Now, do you have to have a different fence for goats, because they'll get out, right?
Yeah, and we haven't done that. We mostly have cattle fencing, so sometimes we do have to go chase one. Mm-hmm. But since we live on my grandparents' farm, we don't want to make any major alterations to their situation.
So if your goat gets out, somebody calls you and says what?
Come get your goat.
Maybe that's where you get the saying, got your goat.
That's right, maybe so. My aunt and uncle live right next door, and sometimes we get the call, hey, they're in our backyard or our front yard, come get it.
They keep everything pretty well mowed down, right?
They can. You often hear this stereotype about goats that, they'll eat anything. They'll even eat tin cans. They're actually kind of picky. Some days, if they were to find a wild blueberry, they'd eat that right up. Another day, maybe they don't need a blueberry, so they don't. So they can actually be a little picky.
And so they could get out because they wanted something over in the other yard.
Yes, yeah, it's true.
So before you raised quail, what was the big thing? Just going to school and living?
My daughter was born a few months before I passed the bar, so we've always had we've had kids for a few years now, and also like the outdoors. Like I mentioned earlier, we took my daughter up to a hiking trail near Gee Creek yesterday. She's only 4, so we didn't choose a really long trail, but we do like to get out in nature.
Would you go like 2 miles or something?
I think we did a 7/10 of a mile. Yeah.
And back?
It was a loop.
They have a trail?
Yeah, they have a bunch of trails up there. There's the main Gee Creek Trail, which I want to say is 1.8 miles, and I'm not sure if that 1.8 takes into account the trip back, so it might be up to 3.6. But anyway, it's a 1.8 in and out trail, and then they have they call it Gee Creek Watchable Wildlife Trail, which we took the 0.7 miles. I didn't see any wildlife, but they're probably it's too cold outside.
Yeah, probably. Is Gee Creek, is it in Benton?
Outside of Benton, you might also say it's close to Reliance.
Would it be Polk County?
Oh, it's definitely Polk County.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is it a national forest?
I think at least part of it is, though there may also be a part that's in a state park area. I want to say they call it Gee Creek Wilderness Management Area.
Mm. So it has to be some kind of national thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if they have a forest ranger go through there, I guess.
I'm sure they do occasionally.
It would border what we know as Webb Store? Because it's past Highway 30, right? No, not Highway 30. The one you go to Webb Store.
I'm trying to think. I want to say that Highway 30 comes off of 411, right?
Yeah, and it goes to Webb Store, right by the that little convenience store.
Yeah, I want to say that you have to go further up 411 to get to Gee Creek.
I think so.
Yeah.
But not quite as far as the Amish community. It's this side of the Amish?
Or if you're talking, I want to say it's past the Amish community, if it's the Amish community I'm thinking of.
At the Needle Eye, right?
I'm not familiar with the Needle Eye.
It's where you go under that, to the Amish place. There you go under the bridge.
Okay.
Under the railroad tracks.
I'm not
Delano.
certain. Delano, yeah. You go past what I would consider Delano in order to get onto Gee Creek Road.
Was that the Amish place?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Now on the right, they have a old restaurant there that just has buggies in the.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think it's called Jessica's Place.
Yeah, but all it's got is their buggies.
Huh. Yeah, I always see those there. I assumed it was an operating business. I thought they'd opened up a while back.
It's like they just parked the buggies there. Do you ever go to the Amish place there?
I've been once or twice. My wife goes more often. They've got some very good homemade products there.
I really like going over there. Mm-hmm. I never have figured out their idea of, they don't use electricity.
Right.
So it's really not hot inside the store in the summer. I get tickled because in the front of their place is the winery. It's like you can have the irony on the same road.
That's right.
But if they don't have electricity, how do they think that people made the metal for the cash registers?
Yeah.
Because they got cash registers.
I think it's not so much that they think that it's immoral. It's just that's not what we do. We'll let other people bother with electricity.
You don't think it's their religious beliefs necessarily, it's more of their tradition.
That may be the case, but I'm not an expert on them. So maybe you should get an Amish person on your show next
Well, that
time.
would be good.
But yeah.
I don't know any Amish people.
Well, I guess we'll have to go out to the Amish market and make some friends.
Yeah. Go through the needle eye. So what else is new as far as do you anticipate getting more attorneys?
I think that would be wise for me in the next several years. But right now, I have enough work for myself. Maybe a little more. Have to balance that. But the difficulty with taking on multiple attorneys in a criminal defense practice, in my opinion, is that you can't necessarily just double the amount of criminal defense work you're doing, because eventually you start to have conflicts. You can't. Often you can't represent. If 2 or more people are charged with a crime, normally, not always, but normally it's unwise, because it's potentially unethical to represent both of them. So if me and another criminal defense practitioner were to combine our offices, we would probably lose out on certain opportunities to represent clients. So that being said, I might bring on someone to do areas of law that I'm currently not interested in. I do a lot of different things, but I mostly do criminal defense, and I do landlord and creditors work, collections work, and there are some areas like Social Security and disability and personal injury that may be very good areas of law to practice in. I just have little interest in them. If I could find someone who wanted to do that, then that might be a good idea.
Why would when a person gets out of law, do they always know what field they're going to go in? I always wondered that, or do they just sort of evolve into that?
There's definitely a lot of personal evolution. Coming out of law school, I knew I wanted to do criminal defense work, but I also had a lot of experience working on the personal injury side of things, because I had interned with Robert Thompson and Jimmy Logan over at Logan Thompson, and so I did a lot of personal injury related stuff for them, but I decided that was not for me in my own practice. What I did not expect was to be interested in collections work, but I handled 1 or 2 collections matters under the supervision of that firm, and I decided I really liked that, and so that's.
I wonder why that interests you.
It really interests me because it's performance based. Generally it's a percentage. If I do well for the client, I do well, and in many ways I think it's an underserved part of the law, especially in this area among area law firms.
And the fact that the harder you work and the better you do, that can increase it is different than Social Security things.
Well, I'm not certain about that, because I know almost nothing about Social Security law. But what I do know is that often you get a lot of bang for your buck on the collection side. Sometimes it only takes sending 1 garnishment or 1 bank levy, and you've made a tremendous amount of money for your client and yourself. And so that has a great deal of appeal to me.
Of course, typically people that are in collections are there because they can't pay it.
At the very least, they couldn't or they wouldn't at some point earlier. Often you'll have a case where someone had a bad attitude and just refused to pay for several months, and someone gets a judgment against them. They probably didn't even show up to court despite having notice, and then a few years pass, they forgot about it, and all of a sudden they've got a very good job somewhere, and I happen to find out about it, and we're going to get the client's money for them. And I will say this: I'm not going to give away my secrets as to how I collect this money. We do it legally, of course, but my firm is very modern, and I would even consider on the cutting edge with regard to finding out what we need to know about judgment debtors in this area.
Sounds like that you would be the guy to go to if you needed to send. And there's another law firm here that's kind of going out. It's sort of I guess they've changed the rules a lot about collections and what is the Dodd-Frank Act, or didn't it have to do with collections or?
I think that the primary statute that every person involved with collections needs to be familiar with is the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the FDCPA. And there are very specific rules, and generally those rules are construed strictly against debt collectors, including attorneys. So we have to be very careful about how we communicate with these debtors, what we say on the phone, what we put in a letter, and so we have to be very much on top of that. And so I think that does scare away some attorneys who might be interested.
What'd you call that? The Fair Debt?
Yeah, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act.
Is that something? Is that a law they passed?
Yeah, it's federal law. It's been federal law for I don't know how many years. It's been as long as I've been interested in this, and it's occasionally amended, updated, or more commonly, you'll have these federal court opinions that will construe certain parts of it in a way that may not have been immediately apparent from the way it was written.
So how do you deal with that?
You just have to stay on top of what those opinions say and make sure that
is the opinion now the law? Let's say who passes that Fair Debt Collections Act?
The U.S. Congress.
So that's the law on how you collect a debt, whether you're an attorney or anybody.
Sure.
So how do you? So you have to go to that book. Is it a book?
Yeah, it's a statute in the U.S. Code.
So it's a section.
Yeah, it's a long section, I think.
Does Tennessee have a debt collections rules that?
Yeah, we certainly do have statutes that relate to debt collections.
How would that override the U.S. federal government statute?
Generally speaking, the federal statute will control. Now, obviously, the states, including Tennessee, they could pass a law that's more restrictive than the federal
but not
statute.
Less.
Yes, and or simply add to it. But for the most part, it's the FDCPA that debt collectors have to be concerned about.
So if to relate it in my terms, the federal law would be county building zoning ordinances, but the state rules would be like subdivision restrictions. They can be more extreme, but not less extreme.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a good analogy.
So is the Tennessee rules, are they worse on collections than, how much worse is it than the federal guidelines?
My understanding of it, I don't think that they're significantly more restrictive. I'm sure they fill in some gaps in the federal statute, but they certainly do not seem to pose as many restrictions as the federal statute.
I guess they have to have something, right? So now the Dodd-Frank Act, does that have anything to do with that?
To be honest, my understanding of Dodd-Frank, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, my understanding is that Dodd-Frank has more to do with banking, but I'm not going to say that it has nothing to do with it.
But how could they have the Dodd-Frank have a rule in there about collections when the federal government? It looks like you just go to that one source.
Well, I mean, I think Dodd-Frank is also a federal law, is my understanding.
How do you keep up with all of that? I mean, you'd have to say, okay, I'm going to collect this debt. It's the federal government rules, the Tennessee rules, and maybe the Dodd-Frank rules, and maybe this other thing that I'm not even aware of.
That's tough, and that's one of the risks and one of the challenges of being an attorney is you have to be able to look at all these sources, be aware that they even exist, and there's some sources for lawyers to look at, that keep them apprised. Hey, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals just said that this is how we're going to read this particular part of a law that affects debt collection, and you just have to stay on top of it. Google's your friend.
So you'd have to Google it. They wouldn't like send you a letter say, "Hey, to all attorneys, you can only collect debt with a blue shirt now."
Yeah, you'd have to look it up either through Google or your LexisNexis subscription.
Golly.
There's a reason that that not everyone wants to be an attorney.
Now, when you say an opinion, is that when they get together and they have some kind of a court case and they say, "We're going to rule now that you have to do it this way."
Yeah.
So now it's not a law, but it's just an opinion?
They call them opinions, but for all intents and purposes, they are law, just like the statute. They claim to only be interpreting the law, but
Who's they?
the judges.
The federal judges?
Yeah, federal judges.
Not the state judges? Or maybe the state judges?
If it's a state appellate court ruling on state law, then yeah, the same for them. But for our purposes, it's considered the law.
And you have to know it.
You do?
They're not going to call you and say, "Hey, Todd, we changed the rule now. You got to do this way."
That's right. I mean, that's why I'm very thankful. For example, on the state side, if you follow, I think the Tennessee Court's Twitter account, every day at 5 p.m., sometimes even on Saturdays, but definitely every weekday, they'll send out a tweet that says appellate opinions for today, and you go click on it and you can see every single appellate opinion that came down. And if there's one that affects my practice somehow, I'll at the very least take a look and see what it's generally about, and I may read the whole thing.
Boy, that's complicated.
It is.
You might be out of town and needing to read that.
Yeah, thankfully we have smartphones and computers.
So if you're on the beach and your wife says, "Hey, what are you doing reading that?" "Well, you're not supposed to." "Well, I was reading the appellate Twitter thing to make sure that." Now, they just give it on Twitter?
No, I mean, I think they also posted it on their website, and if you subscribe to Westlaw or Lexis, they may send you an update. But
And that's probably a charge, right?
oh yeah, absolutely. My Lexis bill alone every month is over $300.
For updates.
Well, it's for access to everything that they provide me: statutes, opinions, secondary sources, regulations. But it's a significant
And
expense.
you probably have that on auto pay of
Yeah.
some sort. And you couldn't write a check for it every
I
month.
mean, you can, but it'd probably be smart to have it on auto pay.
Does Jackie do your taxes?
She does. I'm thankful she does, because it's one less thing for me to worry about, and she knows more about it than I do.
What are you going to do when she quits?
I guess I'm going to have to find someone else. Maybe my Aunt Beth. She does taxes too.
Does she do it with Jackie? She did, but I don't know. No, she works at Farm Bureau.
Yeah, well, they both work at the Farm Bureau. Grandma mostly does taxes
Yeah.
and payroll, and then
So Beth will do some relatives on the side or something.
and other other tax clients, not just relatives. But yeah, if go to Farm Bureau, see either Jackie Gee or Beth Aiken.
Now Jackie she works at the Farm Bureau in Benton also, or Polk County. No, Benton, on Wednesdays maybe.
My Beth or my grandmother?
Grandmother.
My grandmother definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the Farm Bureau tax? That's just something the Farm Bureau will provide for their clients, I guess, just as a courtesy, or.
Yeah, though I mean there's a fee attached to it, but that's my understanding.
It's a little complicated. I never have figured out how that worked.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong, but you may have to be a member in order to use that.
Now, if this quail thing works out, will you quit law, or is it just a hobby?
I have a particular revenue goal that I'm not going to state, but I have a particular revenue goal for the quail operation this year, and I'd love to bring it up to the amount of revenue from the law practice, but I doubt it'll be that way for a long time, and even if it was, I doubt I'd quit the law practice.
And then you could get one wild coyote in there and wipe it all out.
That's very possible, and that's when you have to start shooting coyotes.
Do you have any other hobbies?
Well, I'm going to portray myself to be a kind of boring person, but no, not really. I like to get outdoors, like to go shooting. I've got my little farm projects, but besides from that and the law practice of my family, I don't go do much.
When you say shoot, you mean like target practice?
Yeah. I've got some land up in Monroe County that provides me some very good backstops.
So you like skeet shooting or?
I am terrible at skeet. No, I normally shoot just rifles and pistols.
Mm-hmm. Just like shooting at targets and
Yeah. And
relieve some tension, I guess. Or?
Yeah. Though with ammo prices these days, I've actually got a particular amount. I said I need to store up this much for each caliber before I do any more shooting, because it's just very difficult.
How much
to
is
find
a
it.
bullet?
Well, 5.56, standard AR-15
I
round.
know nothing about
Okay.
guns.
Okay, so AR-15, the most popular rifle in the U.S. right now, shoots the 5.56 millimeter cartridge, and that stuff will easily run you $1 a round right now. And magazine holds 30. So you're
What's a round? A bullet?
Yeah. Bullet, cartridge, powder, all stuck together.
$1 or something?
Yeah.
So
easily.
it's like one bullet is half a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you could, and not less than 2 years ago, you could get it for under 50 cents a round. My understanding is that it's the primers or the bottleneck. There's a little piece in the bottom of the cartridge that's necessary to make the whole thing work, and we've got that's the issue in the supply chain is the lack of primers right now.
I've got a gun carrying permit.
Sure.
But, But I don't know anything about. I couldn't shoot the broadside of the barn, I guess.
We should go take a class, or you just come out to my land sometime.
I went to that. When you get your gun permit, you have to. And my gun's one of those little bitty 5-shot 22s.
Yeah.
I just carry it in my, in my car.
Yeah.
And I could never get to it in time. The main thing is you got to be careful not to swallow it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Those little guns are something else.
Yeah, but it would kill somebody if you shot them.
Very
And
potential.
I qualified with it, with that little gun. Now, Monroe County, how'd you get property in Monroe? Where is Monroe?
Okay, Monroe County is the county immediately north of Polk County, and so it's on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, and it's Madisonville.
Madisonville, yeah.
And Tellico Plains, and so my wife and I had been looking for land for a while, and we found about 21 acres, mostly woods, but it does have a clearing, for a very reasonable price up there. And really it was selling for half of its assessed value. And so we went and bought that, not last year, but the year before. And someday we will, Lord willing, build our house up there.
So how did you find the property in Monroe? Why Monroe? Is property cheaper there?
It certainly is. You can find it much cheaper than in Bradley or even in Polk County. And so my wife and I had been looking around for a while for some land that we could go out and relax at, maybe build a house at later. And during our searches, we found this property that was selling for a very reasonable price compared to its assessed value, and it was something that was within our budget. And we just went ahead and bought it.
Now, at one time, wasn't the county seat of Polk County in Madisonville?
I really don't know.
I believe that's true. I believe that was the county seat, and they later divided it
Okay.
up. So, how far are you from, say, the Amish community to your property, time-wise? Like 20 minutes or an hour?
I would say it's closer to the hour than the 20 minutes.
Now, where do you live from, or where's your property in relation to the Harley-Davidson place in Tellico?
I'd say it's about 15 to 20 minutes.
Closer or further out?
Further out. So once you get past, trying to think, That's up on as you're going up the Cherahalla Skyway,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. So I think that you turn either right before or right after that. If you're going up the Cherahalla, it's before you really start to go up the mountain. There's a bridge over the creek or brook or whatever you want to call
right
it.
past the Harley Davidson
Okay.
place.
Yeah, and there's a Shell station. We might be thinking of two different places.
No,
Okay.
no. You got the Harley Davidson place. You got the cabins on the water. You got the bridge. You go a little further, and then you take a right going to Green Cove.
Okay, so we go across the creek right before you get to the cabins on the water.
Ah,
Yeah, and so you go.
so
up
you're
that
right there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That would be expensive property if it was in Cleveland.
Oh well, I mean we go over that and then we keep going a little
Oh,
way. So
yeah.
we're off of Cane Creek Mountain Road. If you go up that road, it turns into gravel and it goes up to the top of the mountain.
Did you know at one time that they had taxis in Tellico?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I had somebody on the podcast that was from Tellico. Do you remember who that was? They was talking about they had a. Who was that? They used to have taxis in Tellico.
Was that your haunted man?
No. But there was real taxis. Larry Presswood.
Oh.
Larry Presswood, his dad was a taxi driver in Tellico. That's where he was raised.
Wow.
Or that's where his dad was raised. And he came, because they had a manufacturing or a railroad there at one time. You're not familiar with Green Cove, right?
I don't think I am.
Now that's if you keep going past the Harley Davidson, go over a bridge, take a right. It's between there and the water tower, I think
Okay.
it is. And there's a community there that was never bought out by the National Forest called Green Cove. And they got a hotel, a little old hotel, and there's got a place where you can buy those kosher pickles, those real sour, not sour, what I want, tart
Yeah.
pickles. So anyway, up there, that would be hard to. Well, I guess you could practice law and live there, right?
You could. In fact, I have a surprisingly significant practice in the Monroe County area. I get up there close to every month for criminal matters, and both in general sessions court and in the criminal court. In fact, I've got to be up there next week, and I've often thought to myself that if and when I ever did retire and move up to Monroe County to that property, then I might run a little bitty law office there in Tellico Plains. And since I'd be retired, if I didn't get a criminal case, say, fine, let's go home for the day.
Now, if you go straight up that road, you end up in where the casino is.
In North Carolina?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever made it all the way, but
Now,
I
you
can believe
also, if you also go to that Percy Forest. What's the name of that? That forest that's got all the redwood trees.
it. Okay.
It's a famous forest.
Okay.
What's the name of that? The guy that wrote the poem, "Takes God to Make a Tree." Anyway, you keep going up that road. I want to say, I can't remember, but it's a famous place.
Okay. Is it past Indian boundary?
It's way past
Okay,
there.
okay. I've never made it
it's
further
at
than
the
Indian
end,
boundary.
It's at the end of that Cherahalla
Okay.
Skyway.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, I always think of that when I. Now, when you got to go there next week, so you just got one assistant. How do you keep up with all those dates?
Oh, Google Calendar's my friend.
Do you have an alarm thing on it?
Yeah. I'll get notifications, and I'm looking at my calendar multiple times a day. Looking.
Do you get? Does it? When? Say you got to go. What, Thursday? Did you say that next week?
I think I'm going next Monday, not tomorrow, but the next.
So when will your alarm go off? Sunday night or Monday morning?
It'll probably go off the evening before if I do have an alarm set. But my caseload's still not so large that I don't keep a mental calendar up here too. So while I'll keep track of that, I also have something up here reminding me. So I'll know about it unless just something crazy happens and I forget about something, which is very, very rare. Normally I'll be cognizant of it, thinking of it for weeks in advance.
Do you prepare for it the night before or the week before?
Well, it depends on the matter, but generally I want to be prepared a week or more ahead of time. We're not doing jury trials right now, so I don't have any jury trials I'm getting ready for this month. But, I think I've got a motion hearing set next Monday as well as a sentencing hearing, so that sentencing hearing is certainly going to take some time to prepare for.
Why do they not have any jury trials because of COVID?
Right now, they are not having jury trials.
What if you wanted one?
If you wanted one, they would say you're going to have to wait. We just got an order from the Tennessee Supreme Court on Friday that said that beginning in April, we can start doing jury trials again. But the docket is so backed up that it could still very easily be several months before someone who wanted one got one.
Well, if I was in trouble and didn't want to go to jail, I would just claim I wanted a jury trial, and then just claim I was afraid of COVID.
Well, you wouldn't be the first one to do that. Unfortunately, they'll say, "Oh, you can." Well, if you're out on bond, then yeah, that might be a way to delay it. But if you're not on bond, you're still in jail.
Is there any advantage to delaying cases like that?
On the one hand, as an attorney, part of my ethics obligations is to not unduly delay matters, but from a very practical perspective, there would be times when a defendant would want to delay if, for example, it meant that but prosecution witnesses might move away, or even, God forbid, they might be very elderly and pass away before a trial happened. So there might be reasons a defendant would want to delay it, but we're not supposed to unduly delay it. So it's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah. Because it seems to me like the more you delayed it, the less people would be mad.
That's certainly a consideration.
It's like they won't be mad if I can put this thing off.
Yeah, and it's also sometimes witnesses start to forget important details the longer things drag along.
I was reading this study about people that have eyewitness accounts. They are absolutely so far wrong that they shouldn't even count.
It's very interesting, that part of the science of eyewitness testimony. It's certainly true that you need that eyewitness testimony can be very unreliable. I think that's one reason why in the Bible it often mentions that you need 2 or 3 eyewitnesses for a capital case, and so that way, hopefully.
So the Bible says that.
Yes, it does. In the Old Testament, several times in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses.
The Pentateuch.
Yeah.
I call them the Gospels. No, what do you?
The Gospels are the first 4 books of the New
Why do you
Testament.
call them the Pentateuch?
Penna, I think, is Latin for 5, so there's 5 books, and that's just the name they got.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy?
Yep.
I never heard it called the Pentecost. But so now there were lawyers in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me some stuff that the Bible says about lawyers.
Woe unto you, lawyers. That's what it says.
What does it mean, woe unto you?
It means watch out. Something bad's going to happen to you. And the word that's translated lawyer in the New Testament was usually people who interpreted the old law. People who would say, well, the command about the Sabbath means you can't do this, this, and this. It wasn't so much an advocacy role like we have today, but I can certainly think of plenty of occasions today where "woe unto you lawyers" would still be accurate.
So you're saying the lawyer originally was to interpret the law,
That's my understanding
but
of
not
the use
to
of
be
the Bible.
but not be an advocate for. Was lawyers around before the Bible?
Well, since the Bible goes back to creation, no, not before the Bible, but in
Civilization, the first records of civilization had always had lawyers in it.
I think that it developed fairly soon because people always needed someone to talk for them, to represent their interests.
Why is that? I mean, like me I'm a general contractor. I build houses sometimes to sell.
Mm-hmm.
I can't sell them. I have to get a real estate agent to sell them because I'll give the house away. So why is it people have to have? Could you be your own lawyer, or would you feel more comfortable with somebody else representing you?
You can be your own lawyer, but it's, I believe Benjamin Franklin, it's either Benjamin Franklin or Abraham Lincoln, said that, I want to say it was Lincoln.
Might be Mark Twain.
It might be. He said that the lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. Because
That might have been Poor Richard.
it could have been. It very well could have been.
Poor Richard's Almanac.
Yeah, I think probably more than one person said it because
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
And fact is that even if you are well versed in the law, fact is that you can't, because it's your own case, you can't be as objective as someone who's also well versed in the law but can look at it with a little distance between them and the situation.
And also having a lawyer, it's almost like if you're trying to tell me you didn't do this, I assume you're biased.
Absolutely.
But if you hire this lawyer and he's telling me what you meant, for some reason my brain tells me that he's not biased.
He is biased because he represents the defendant,
Yeah.
but certainly he appears to be less biased. And
It helps me to believe it more.
yeah.
Because it's two people, as the Bible says.
Well, the lawyer's not a witness. He's not supposed to testify. What he says is not evidence. But it certainly, I don't know that juries necessarily always think that way. They see someone who is zealously, passionately defending this person, and they say, well, he looks like an honest, credible person, therefore maybe he's right about his client. And so that's why that's one reason trial advocacy is so important.
And that's one reason, what do you mean trial advocacy? A lawyer?
Yeah, and the ability to, and the willingness to zealously represent the client. You know, just because you have a lawyer sitting at your table doesn't mean that things are going to go well, because if he doesn't actively fight for your interest, then, well, you might as well sit your mama up there. She might do a better job, in fact.
So that'd be like a court-appointed attorney.
There are court-appointed attorneys. I often take court appointments in the criminal courts of this area, but sometimes it's people hire private counsel.
So the private, the ones that would hire you private, be like say somebody does something wrong, and they don't have a lawyer, and they go to not the district attorney, but what's the other one?
Public defender.
Yeah, that's
Richard Hughes.
Richard Hughes. Yeah, I'm not like him, but anyway, so he would say, okay, we've got to get you a lawyer.
Well, normally the way it works is you go in and the court says, do you have an attorney? Do you want an attorney? Can you afford an attorney? And a lot of people, honestly say, I can't afford an attorney. So they fill out what's called an affidavit of indigency that basically says, I have very few assets. I have very little income. I can't afford to hire an attorney. And the court, if the court accepts that and believes them, then the court will say, okay, I'm appointing the public defender. Now, sometimes the public defender is conflicted out. Maybe there's multiple defendants and they already represent one, or there are all kinds of reasons for conflicts. And in that case, then a private attorney will be appointed from the private bar, and I'm one of those private attorneys.
And so you'll be paid by the state, I
Yeah.
guess, right?
Yeah.
And is that limited money that you can make, or is
Yeah, there are caps depending on the severity, not the severity, but the obviously a Class A felony or a murder case is you're allowed to bill more hours than say a shoplifting case, and then there are caps on how many hours total you can get in a year. But I don't think most attorneys approach those.
So you could represent a bunch, but you can only bill so many hours.
That's true, and the way it's set up right now, we actually got a pay raise within the last couple of years. Used to you could get $50 an hour for work in court, which was only classified as like you're actually having a hearing, you're actually in front of a judge. Didn't include like waiting around or doing something besides a hearing. And then you got $40 an hour for anything outside of court. They recently bumped it up so that both of those are worth $50 an hour, and that's significantly less than private attorneys get paid hourly.
What if they said, what if you said, I can afford a lawyer, but I don't want one. I want the state to provide me one.
If you outright told the judge that you could afford one but didn't want to pay for it, he'd say, well, too bad, you're going to have to go get your own.
But I thought you had the right to
an
attorney.
You do have a right to an attorney, and if you're indigent, if you're unable to afford one, then you're entitled to a court-appointed one.
The law doesn't say that. It says you have a right to an attorney.
Yes.
If you don't, the court, everybody that watches TV, if you have a right to an attorney. If you don't, well, the court, well, that's in the, what do they call that?
The Miranda rights.
Miranda rights.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with how they got the Miranda rights, that story?
I know I've read it before. What do you recall about it?
I can't remember. I just know it was really interesting. The guy that they made the Miranda rights because of the guy, and then later on the Miranda rights is what convicted him or something like that.
Oh, I'm not sure about that part, but I know Miranda rights are. You first get the idea in Miranda versus Arizona, which is the name of the case that we get that from. Then there's also Gideon versus Wainwright, which is specifically about the right to counsel. And so, as the law stands right now, if you're truly indigent, if you can't afford an attorney, you're entitled to have one paid for by the state.
And who determines whether or not you can afford it?
The court does. And
when you say the court, that particular judge?
That particular judge. So if you're in Bradley County General Sessions Court, typically that's going to be Judge Randolph. If you're in criminal court, that's going to be either Judge Donaghy or Judge Freiberg.
And so they would say, when we say the court will decide, the judge in charge of that will decide.
Exactly.
So if you were really guilty of something, you would probably want to hire an attorney who is zealous. In order to get that, he doesn't need to be a guy making $50 an hour in court appearances only, right?
I like to think that whether I'm privately hired or appointed by the court, that I'm giving every client that same zealous advocacy, and supposedly guilty clients are entitled to that, innocent clients are entitled to that, everyone's entitled to that.
Well, the law is so subject to interpretation. I mean, just about every law is subject to interpretation, isn't it, or is it?
I think that there are plenty of gray areas in the law. And so that's why we have these court opinions, because they're there to interpret the law.
Do they ever interpret it different later?
They do.
Do they admit that, or is it not said?
They'll admit that. They'll sometimes say, today we overrule, Smith versus Jones, which was decided in 1932, and we say now the rule is X instead of Y, and that's. Sometimes that's very surprising and very.
Is that based? Would their opinions be changed because of cultures change?
Sometimes that's the case. They'll say, "Look, the opinion of the court who wrote Smith versus Jones was outdated. Society's moved on. We don't as a society we don't think that's right or that's wrong anymore.
Such as women voting now and didn't then, some kind of
Sure.
rule that was, so we decided that we're going to change this now due to these new, you can vote at 20 now instead of 21, and so now this doesn't apply and that does. So this is ever evolving.
Yes.
Could you have a society that just had the rules, no questions, no amendments? What would happen?
It would be nice if it could be that way, but I think that because humanity and humanity's cultures are always changing, that you're going to have to make some changes every once in a while. The fact is that we'll never get it perfect on the first try. That's why even the U.S. Constitution included a provision for making amendments. They said things will change, circumstances will change, people will change. We need a way to change it so that we can keep up with the way society is.
Boy, that's complicated.
It is.
So, give me an example of something that has changed opinion-wise that didn't have nothing to do with. There's probably none of them that didn't have to do with culture.
Broadly speaking, that's probably right. Yeah. Whether we're talking about, but yeah, just about anything. If there was a significant change, it probably had something to do with the culture, especially when you get to constitutional issues, because I think we can agree that the Supreme Court has made decisions in the last 70 years that would not have been made if it were not for changing cultural standards. We might think of Roe versus Wade. We might think of the legalization of same-sex marriage. All of those were based ultimately on changing views about those subject matters.
And they can, even this transgender thing, that's got to be changing a lot of things that me and you don't even have a clue about at this point.
I think so. In fact, it's already changed some things. I believe it was Justice Gorsuch. Within the last year or so, they had a case interpreting federal sex discrimination law. And they determined that in a case involving employment and someone who, I believe it was a man who had decided that he identified as a woman and started wearing women's clothes to work, he got fired because of it. And the court said that firing was sex discrimination, because if a woman had worn the same clothes to work, no one would have batted an eye. No one would have fired her for it. And so that was certainly a, up until now, novel interpretation of the law, but that opinion came down, and for now, that's the way the federal law is going to be interpreted on sex discrimination.
That if you fire a man for wearing a dress to the office, it's sexual discrimination.
I believe that's a fair statement of what he wrote. And while I personally disagree with it, I'm not going to tell people that that's not the federal law at this point.
Even though that's not even having nothing to do with sexual. I mean, why is the dress related to being, the what is it, that culture that wears them, that plays the bagpipes?
Oh, the Scots?
Yeah, I mean, they wear skirts, right?
Yeah, kilts. I've actually got a family member by marriage who wears kilts. And
is he a Scot?
Not that I know of. But anyway, that's not a choice I'd make.
It'd make you want to say, maybe it was, say, are you Scottish?
I think he also works for a company that makes them.
Oh. So do you think that being, now has so you're saying back in the Bible times the lawyers were more interpreting the law, then it evolved into they're representing a person.
So back in Greek and Roman times, initially the accepted practice was, they said, a man, a citizen, needs to be able to speak for himself, represent himself in lawsuits. But then they started developing exceptions like, well, maybe I'm not well, maybe I'm sick, I can't make a speech, so my friend's going to speak for me. And you still weren't supposed to pay them to do it. You're just your friend speaking for you. Well, eventually it got around to, these men who were speaking for their friends, they're going to, they might start taking payment, and then it just turned into a business, a profession. And so there were certainly lawyers, orators during New Testament times, but in the New Testament, when Jesus is talking about lawyers in his culture, in the Jewish culture, generally you're looking at men who interpreted the law.
Boy, that gets complicated. So that's how it's evolved into what we know as the lawyers today.
That's my understanding, yes.
What else does the Bible say about lawyers?
There is there's not a whole lot, but there is in one of Paul's
They're
epistles.
trying to sell me a car warranty.
Oh, well, has your car warranty expired yet? Do you need an extended car warranty?
Did you see that thing on Facebook where they had the bottle with the message in the bottle, and the guy gets it out and it says, we're trying to reach you for your car warranty?
That one's good. Speaking of things that ought to be illegal.
That should be illegal. Here we're trying to talk and they're trying to sell me the car warranty.
Yeah, that's right. But Paul had at least one friend or acquaintance who was a lawyer. His name was Zenos. Refers to Zenos the lawyer in one of his epistles. I'm not sure what Zenos exactly did, but he had a Greek name, so it suggests to me that he was probably not from the Jewish lawyers who were that Jesus speaks about. He may have been something more along the lines of the way we think of a lawyer today, because he was probably of Greek or Roman extraction.
Now, let me ask you this. You go to Union Grove Church of Christ.
I do.
Are you... Somebody said you were the song leader there?
Yeah, I'm leading singing, a cappella singing there.
Remember when Barney Fife sung a cappella?
A cappella. We sing a cappella, but I've never sung a cappella. But yeah, I lead the singing on Sundays, and we have another brother who leads it on Wednesday evening.
Now, what about Jimmy Whaley? He was
Whaley.
always leads. Is he lead singing anymore at all?
Unfortunately, he is in an assisted living home now. His health's not great at all, but he was my predecessor in that position.
He led singing there forever.
He
How
did.
many years?
Oh, decades. I can
50
guarantee-
years?
Probably so. Yeah, a good man.
You know, he was a good man. He was always real friendly to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was like a sharpshooter in the Army or something.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was a sharpshooter in the military. He's a very meticulous guy.
That is impressive.
Did you, when you say he was your predecessor, do you have his songbook?
I don't have his songbook, but I think we were leading singing out of the same book.
Did he have a specific songbook record?
I want to say that he had one of those leather-bound ones as opposed to the standard hardback. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a nice one.
Now, when I used to go there as a kid, they had the benches on the side where people sit on the side. Mm-hmm. I guess they were called the deacon's bench.
Up near the podium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they still have those?
They do, and that's I sit in one of them when I'm leading singing.
Let's see now. When you sit in there, you don't sit there while you're leading.
No,
singing.
no.
You sit
at
there.
services where I'm going to lead singing. I sit there when I'm not leading singing.
Do you when they're preaching? Do you sit there?
I do.
So you sit on the side where everybody can see you. Why don't you just go sit down in the thing?
I could, but my family sits about halfway back down the building. So when it's time for me to get up and lead that invitation song, that'd be a walk. So I just sit up there to make things convenient.
Or have you had any singing lessons?
Not formally, no.
Do you do this?
I do not, because that distracts me. I'm not good enough that I can do this. And
That'd be like doing this.
That's right. About the only thing I'll do is 1, 2, 3.
What do you mean, like first, second, third verse?
Yeah.
How do you know
stanzas.
how do you know which ones? Do you already have it planned?
I do have it planned. Yeah.
What determines?
At the end of the day, it's just it comes down to which ones I want to sing. But I like to lead. A lot of times if you have a 4-verse song, people will skip the third stanza traditionally.
Why?
Because they're not going to sing all 4, and they say, "Oh, I like the first and second one, then we'll do the fourth." They always leave the first and the fourth, or the first and the third, but not always one of those in the middle. And so, because some of those stanzas get ignored, I like to include them more often.
That's a good lawyer.
That's right. That's
You're
right.
fighting for the person.
I'm fighting for these disadvantaged, ignored stanzas.
Stanzas. Well, they call them stanzas.
I don't know. That's probably Italian. I don't speak Italian.
Probably, yeah. So, do you have a certain catalog of songs you sing?
There's the songbook, and I have to, because that's what everyone else has in the building. That's what I'm going to lead out of. I try to have a lot of variety, sing as many of them as I know. I certainly don't know all of them.
Do you mix them up?
I do, yeah, because it's terrible when a congregation I've been in congregations before where the song leader had, like, we're going to sing these 5 songs the first Sunday, these 5 songs the second. And so they might have only sung 20 or 25 songs out of the songbook. And
At the most.
Yeah. And, there are other good songs in there. You shouldn't limit yourselves.
Do you ever sing a song and nobody else knows it? You're like the only one singing, and you think, "Boy, I wish I hadn't sung that song."
That's happened to me before. So sometimes if I have a question, I'll go to a few other members and say, "Hey, do we know this song?" If we don't, then maybe we need to learn it later during a Bible class hour or something.
So, what's your go-to song?
I have several that I really like. I really like There Is a Habitation, or maybe it's called O Zion. Then there's We Praise Thee, O God. I like A Mighty Fortress, but I'm not very good at
Now,
singing
those
it.
aren't Jimmy Whaley songs.
They may not be.
I don't believe they are.
But,
You must have.
I've led singing in a few other places,
Yeah.
so I like a lot of the older, more traditional songs. Like, I'm not saying like from the 1800s or 1900s. I really like the really old stuff that's based on some of the more classical melodies.
So you're singing. You like stuff that's even older than Jimmy Whaley was singing.
Yeah. He led some good ones too, but
Does his wife still go there?
unfortunately she passed a few weeks ago.
A few weeks ago.
It wasn't that long ago. I know that.
Seems like I remember that.
Yeah.
You know, when I was growing up, that's with the church I went to, in vacation Bible school, Jimmy Whaley said that I came in, I guess I was 4 or 5, and we were late.
Yeah.
That's when all the kids sat up the front, and he said I came in and said, "Wait on me, Jimmy, wait on me." Is that good?